forgot to record it. So I've started recording now, which is fantastic. People haven't missed much for those who are watching the recording. Okay, just to start us off, we've got a couple of polls, so we know who's in the room. I'm going to start with, so you should be able to see this. We'll throw this up for 30 seconds. Where are you from? Are you a householder? Are you a practitioner? Maybe you might be an architect. Are you a policymaker, community energy group, or a builder? You can click on multiple things if you think you fit into more than one of these boxes. So, yeah. Nearly everyone, got nearly everyone. Oh, nearly 100%. Fantastic. End the poll there and share the results. Okay, so the majority of people here are householders. That's what they typify themselves as. But we've got a fair few practitioners in the room, and also people from community energy groups. Community Energy Fortnight just finished, so fantastic to see people here. And then I've got a little practical question.
£600.
Oh, Mike, you need to mute yourself.
Sorry.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about Carbon Corp's Community Green Deal. So it's our specific programme, also known as Go Early. And it would be good to know how many people have heard of this programme, or this is really new to you, because then that'll help us pitch this presentation. A few more seconds. Fantastic. Okay, so it's really unfamiliar to a lot of people, which is great because often we go on about it like everyone knows about it. But as we get bigger, obviously more people haven't heard about it, and that's fair enough. So me and Marianne will do a little introduction now and hand over to Dom. But essentially, the Community Green Deal programme, it was also called Go Early, which is a bit of a misnomer in some ways. But anyway, Community Green Deal. And we used the term Green Deal before the Green Deal. But this project came around in late 2012. And the government were looking to launch the Green Deal. And they were looking at the programme, and they saw there were some weaknesses in there around a programme that looked at single measures, like simple measures that maybe didn't go for whole house retrofit, or multiple measures going at one time, and wasn't maybe ambitious in certain ways. And also they were looking to kind of test out ideas of working with trusted community intermediaries, community energy groups, as delivery vehicles for retrofit. So there was a wider programme to test out some ideas around Green Deal before its formal launch. And we were lucky enough to kind of get involved with that via Greater Manchester Combined Authority, who brought us in. And most of the other programme at that time, they were testing out housing association retrofit, some of the technical aspects, or maybe some houses that are joined housing association or council homes. This really on the programme was one of the only ones, there was a few, but only one of the few ones that looked at owner-occupier retrofit whole house. So it was a programme, 14 houses around Greater Manchester, householders that had come, they were either Carbon Corp members or come through our different networks and part of our eco green home tours and this sort of thing. And essentially what it involved was an expanded whole house assessment, not just a Green Deal assessment, subsidised architectural design and development, which Marianne worked on, Urbed, work procured by Carbon Co-op on behalf of the householders. So it wasn't that we were helping households procure work on their own, we were doing it together, with Urbed acting as administrators for that contract. Households were also able to benefit from a 0% interest loan, though the majority, or practically all of them, put in some of their own money as well. And they were also able to access ECO, Energy Company Obligation money, which now is very, very narrow in its remit, but at that time was broad and was seen as a way to treat hard-to-treat properties and areas where fuel poverty was a problem.
I think, Jonathan, it might be worth saying as well that it was when the eco funding was reasonably generous. So we got it on the basis of the amount of carbon we were going to save, and we were being paid something around £100 per tonne, which was a lot. It's down at £10-15 per tonne before. Yeah, that made a difference.
Yeah.
A bit.
In terms of motivations, the householders, people like Dom and Mike and Rachel, carbon savings was most important, comfort improvements and bill savings as well. But it wasn't, as some might think, financial as the primary thing and what's the payback. It was a much broader set of motivations, and green issues and climate change part of that. This is an example of the assessments that we did at the time. And this is Eleni, who was our assessor at the time, or one of our assessors. And so all the householders got assessments. In fact, a wider group got assessments, and they were then narrowed down into the people that went forward. And the assessments set out the kind of improvements that people could have and the kind of impacts that would offer and the kinds of costs involved. There was then an extensive design development phase, which was a fairly prolonged process. Do you want to comment on this, Marianne? This is one of your areas of expertise.
Yeah, so I think something that had maybe been missed a little bit and doesn't work, I think, when it comes to owner-occupier whole house retrofit, is that every single one of the houses on the programme and every single one of the householders were the houses were different and the people were different. So their budgets were slightly different, their needs were all different. So it wasn't a case of getting a kind of really simple Green Deal assessment or eco assessment and then just deploying a standard set of measures. The measures were all tailored to those houses and to those people. And to get to a point where you had something that was agreed, that worked with the house and also worked with people's budgets, because people were prepared to borrow a greater or lesser amount, or they had their own, more or less of their own money to put in. So the budgets varied quite a bit, from probably something in the region of £20,000 up to, I think the biggest one was about £60,000. So it's quite a big range. And we had to make all of the design work fit to that. So there was quite a bit of iterative development of that, I would say, going backwards and forwards, seeing what fitted. And then working that up in more detail for the construction contract as well.
Yeah, send the process. And that's the back of Dom's house.
Yeah, that, though, I should say that's after the work was done. So, or when it was nearly finished anyway.
Yeah. This, in very broad terms, is the contractual arrangement that I was talking about. So there was all the householders at the top, and then Carbon Co-op sitting in between the householders and the contractor. So we were able to manage the contract and oversee quality and also cost to a certain extent. And then Urbed acting as design team, as Marianne says, but also administrating the contract between us and the contractor. And the contractor also bringing in subcontractors. We also procured some PV panels, and we did that directly, so away from the contractor as well. So, we took on a hell of a lot of project risk here, playing this role. But yeah, the payoff was around quality and oversight.
Yeah, it was, for those who know about such things, it was a traditional contract as well. So when we were doing contract admin, it gave us a reasonable degree of control over what was done, and we could ask for things to be put right and be quite specific about what products were used.
Marianne sort of beaten me to this about the eco, but yeah, the eco, it didn't really work out. We did get some eco, but there was some horrific problems with it. It wasn't really fit for purpose. It took so much time. It was so time intensive, and yeah, it was just awful. It's not really relevant to us.
No, I think the way to express it is that if you did the timesheets for my colleague Helen, who did a lot of the paperwork on it, and saw how much money we got, basically, if we charged full whack for her time, it wouldn't have. They'd have cancelled each other out, because it was just that much of an administrative burden.
Yes. So, so most of the design work took place in 2013, and then we started on site in 2014. And you can see some of the work going on here. Extensive work, external wall insulation for every home, internal wall insulation, I think practically for every home, not for DOMs. Triple glazed windows, ventilation systems, large scale works, lots going on. Yeah, do you want to say anything about that, Marianne?
Well, I suppose in general, our targets at the time were to achieve an 80% reduction in carbon emissions from a 1990 baseline. So it was similar to the targets from the TSB Retrofit for the Future programme that had gone on a few years before. But in general, what that meant was reducing people's space heating demands by quite a chunk, so that a lot of the work was focused on insulation and better windows and doing what we could on air tightness, but I won't preempt some of the stuff Dom's going to say on that.
And here is some pictures of the work afterwards. I won't say too much. I mean, it's a fantastic project and some really great work. Some lovely pictures, solar PV panels, lovely windows. And we've done a lot since around opening up the homes for people to come in and do eco home tours and share the learning. So the project, so 2014, the work's going on, and most of the PV panels went on towards the end of 2014, some to the beginning of 2015. So a long-term project. Dom's going to talk now. I'm going to hand over, and he'll talk about the data that we all want to hear about. But what I would say is, if you look on our website, Carbon Co-op, under reports and publications, you'll see quite a few reports. The Powering Down Together ones there, and also the CIBSE ones, both look at this project in some detail. So if you're interested in more, finding out what the measures, the exact things we used, some of the responses from householders, I would say it's a very disruptive process, but people generally afterwards felt it was very worthwhile and the improvements they got. But yeah, have a look at those at your leisure, and I'll circulate a link when
Jonathan,
yeah.
I suppose the only other thing to say, to give a bit of context, what Dom's going to talk about is the relationship with the contractor wasn't always easy.
Yes.
And the way that we'd appointed them, we went through a tender process, and our ambition was to work with an SME, local SME builder, not necessarily one who'd done retrofit work of this kind of niche before. But the firm we worked with were familiar with a lot of the tech. They'd done internal wall insulation and external wall insulation. They just hadn't done whole house before. And there was a lot of learning from that relationship as well, is what I'll probably say.
Yeah. Okay. One thing I forgot to mention was the slides and the recording will all be made available afterwards and sent to people who've registered for the webinar. So the work was completed in 2015 with the panels, and 5 years later, we're reflecting on where we've got to. So, Dom, I'll stop sharing now and I'll hand over to you.
Hi. So I'm Dom, and I'm one of the householders of the 14 that have been mentioned. And I suppose I was one of the ones who was most interested in, before the actual retrofits, I'd always been assessing our own energy use. So I took it on myself to collate a lot of the data that came through, got interested in it as it was coming together. So we had some monitoring that was being done by Salford University. I took an interest in that and helped sort of bring that together. I'm going to try and share my screen now with the presentation. Why can't I do that? No. Can anyone see my presentation?
Not yet.
No, not yet. Sorry, Dom.
You did share it earlier.
I did share it earlier, so that is my presentation.
I do have it if need be, but hopefully it won't.
This will be why. Here we go. Share screen. This one. Share. Right. Can you see that?
Fantastic.
Yeah. Right. So this is going to be my data-rich analysis of the retrofits. I'm calling it 6 years on because for us it kind of finished November 2014 when the solar panels went on. So we're 5.5, 6 years anyway. Right, next slide. There we go. Is that working? Yeah, there we go. I think what we've got here is really useful. I'm really pleased with what we've been able to achieve together as householders, Carbon Co-op. As a team, we've achieved big things, I think, here, and the biggest thing is the stuff we've learned. So, and a lot of what we've learned is from the data, from collecting data together, pooling it, tracking the data, and collaborating, sharing experiences, all that kind of stuff. And I suppose what we can learn for the future, that's also important. Slide. So yeah, Jonathan and Marianne have already introduced what the timescales were. So February to June was when the main insulation works was done on the houses, and then solar PV, I had it down as October to November 2014. And then immediately we started getting data in from Salford University. And also I was encouraging other householders to collect just their bill data, their gas and electricity data. So that was coming through as well from a few of the houses. And that's what we've got here. This is the main feature of my presentation, is about 4 to 6 houses that I've got 4 still now. There were 6 or 7 back in 2015 providing me with data, but we're 5 years on now. So obviously the number of people sharing data has kind of reduced, but it's still useful. So what am I going to talk about? What have we learned? I'm going to talk about the energy performance, the big headlines that come out of that. I'm going to talk about comfort take, whether there is any, how it happens, whether we should call it comfort take, all that kind of stuff. Learning to live with the houses, what other comments have come through a little bit on that. The good and the bad, and I'm not going to touch on the contractor too much. I'm just going to say what the outcome is and that kind of stuff. And yeah, what next? So the big headlines are big savings in gas use. So over the 5 years, it's been relatively constant. It's been 44% reduction in gas use for the houses that I'm collecting data for. And 47% reduction in space heating demand. Yeah, as I've said, it's quite stable. Individual households have gone up and down a bit, but if you look at the totality of the heating and gas use, it's been very stable, from a big reduction from before the retrofit and then stable afterwards. Yeah, I'm going to talk about how tracking energy use, space heating is quite tricky and needs quite a bit of patience. You need a lot of data. And then I'm going to talk about the future and electricity and electrification of heat and that sort of stuff. So I'm going to go straight into comfort take and the fact that it's not really always, maybe we shouldn't always call it comfort take. This is my house, and the graph shows the temperature in blue over a typical 24-hour period before the retrofit, and then the temperature in orange after the retrofit for the same 11 days. So it's the same 11 calendar days. It's the average of the temperature over 24 hours. And what you can see is that before the retrofit, the temperature typically dipped sort of to, actually, the sensor here was the Salford University sensor, which was slightly overreading. I think it dips lower than that, but the profile is correct. So the sensor didn't change. So it's the same sensor measuring the same thing, but that sensor was saying that before the retrofit, it dipped to about 19 degrees overnight. And then during the same period after the retrofit, it was only dipping to 20 degrees. So the average temperature has gone up. You can see that the orange line is higher on average than the blue line. So that's comfort take, because the house is warmer. But actually it's not really warmer when we want it to be warmer. So the evening temperatures were unchanged. So is that comfort take or not? I would say, so for the purposes of energy assessment, it looks like comfort take, but it's not. So here we are. These are the 4 houses that I've got a lot of detail for. I've got data for the whole period from about 1 or 2 years, or even 3 years in some cases. For my house, I could go back 10 years, but for these 4 houses collectively, we've got data for about 2 or 3 years before the retrofit. And then here, this is for each one, this is where the retrofit happened about here. And for this house here, you can see on each one, that's where the retrofit happened, and here. So the gas use on our house, that's our house, came down and then actually rebounded a little bit. So maybe that is comfort take. This is the coldest winter that we've had in recent years. So this graph isn't corrected for temperature, but this is the winter of the beast from the east here. And it shows up on most of the graphs. So around here, and we're in the way, around here. And again, now this house here, the gas has gone up again and stayed up. But we'll talk about this one later. They've had a loft extension, so the house is now bigger. So in actual fact, probably this is correct. This isn't corrected for floor area. So probably if we corrected this for floor area, it would come back down to sort of flat. And in terms of electricity use, I'll touch on that later, but a little bit. All the houses, these 4 houses had PV, so consumption came down, electricity consumption came down in every single case. Our house is kind of the exception here, because it came back up because we got an electric vehicle. So that pushed up our electricity use significantly. And it's gone even higher because we've now got a SunAmp hot water system. So that's taking some gas, or reducing our gas demand, which is maybe why this has come down here. But I think it's going to continue coming down quite a lot soon. But that's why we'll keep tracking our energy use. So yeah, one important thing, and Marianne touched on it, is all the households are different, and we're all different. So this is the same sort of 24-hour pattern of heat in a house for the 4 different houses that I've got data for here. So actually this is our house, which followed that similar profile that we had earlier. So the darker orange, that's our house. there's another house that was much cooler, this one down here. So during the day, looks like, well, there was no heating at all until the evening. And then the heating comes on and the temperature comes up, but only to about 18 degrees. And during most of the day, it's down at 16. This house here in light orange, at that time, the householder had the heating on pretty much 24/7. So the temperature was very stable, but yeah, constant. And then this house, a bit warmer than all the others, but and similar profile in a way to ours, but maybe they go to bed later. No. So the temperature stayed higher here, sort of till close to midnight. So yeah, the way we live is unique to us all. Each house is different, how we live in it, when we heat the house, what kind of age group is in the house. These 4 houses, they're all different. Some of them have got 3 people or 4 people in them. Some are just single occupiers. So yeah, in terms of my house, I've got a lot of data going back to the year 2001 approximately. And the level of data that I've been collecting has increased as the technology that we're able to use has improved. So being able to use thermal imaging. One thing that has come out of this is that I've learned that there's different ways of measuring the actual amount of heat that we need. So we could measure it in degree days, heating degree days, which just looks at the outside temperature and says, well, if it's a certain temperature outside, we need a certain amount of heating to get to a comfortable temperature inside. Another way of looking at it is to use delta T, or the difference between outside and inside temperature. They're quite close. They come up with quite close answers using delta T versus using degree days, but obviously slightly different because one of them ignores the internal temperature and the other one uses it. So this is stuff for my house. So we've got the thermal imaging of go back again. There we go. Got the thermal image of our bifold door at the back, which is actually a new thing that was done after the retrofit. So we've done a little mini retrofit last summer on top of the carbon co-op retrofit. We've had this bifold door installed and it's performing quite well. This is an example of using degree days and a regression analysis for 2016. And I've got data as monthly, daily, seasonal. I've got smart meter data. I use the Open Energy Monitor to collect electricity and temperature data inside the house.
Tom?
Yeah.
Just before you go on, we've had a question from one of the attendees just asking if you could repeat what the changes were to your house, what made a difference to that temperature.
Sure. Well, the retrofit that we had on our house was external wall insulation on 3 sides, the rear and the sort of outrigger bit at the back of the house. The front of the house, we had a little cavity which was filled with cavity wall insulation, just enough to warrant it. We had triple glazing on 3 windows, and we had underfloor insulation, and we had a passive stack ventilation system. Initially was designed but was changed to passive inlet vents with MEV, mechanical extract ventilation. because of problems of trying to install the stack, which only came was only uncovered while the works were happening. All of that, has made a big difference to our house. It's warmer by 1 or 2 degrees. And things like the beast from the east that would otherwise have been quite chilly in the house was no problem. I'll come on to what was good and what was bad in a bit. Hopefully that answers that little question. So I've got, as I said, I've got loads of data. There's still things that are tricky to quantify and measure. So things like solar gain, I am starting to get a grip on how that affects. So on this graph here, you can see what I've called some comfort take, which may or may not be, as we discussed earlier, comfort take, or whether it's just a higher average internal temperature. Also, some like 2018 was mild but cloudy, I think we could characterize it as. Whether cloudier years need more heating is something that's difficult to quantify until we have a good idea of what the solar gains really are on a real property. And then questions that have also arisen is things about airflow within a house, whether it's better to keep the doors on the ground floor shut if you've got, for example, a loft and open staircases. That might not matter if you've got MVHR or something like that, but whether on these types of retrofits, that's a big factor. Also quite tricky to gauge. So yeah, as I said, what worked well and what was less good. So the houses were much more livable. As I've mentioned, the temperatures are more stable and it doesn't dip as much overnight in winter. It doesn't overheat. There's no evidence in our house, or I don't think I've had any feedback from other houses of issues with respect to overheating. The targets were broadly met. We've got 60% reduction in carbon emissions relative to before the retrofits to after, and I think that's pretty close to an 80% reduction compared to the average houses in the UK. The householders were generally, on average, lower energy users than the average before the retrofits anyway. So things that also worked well: external wall insulation, the triple glazing is really good quality. I'll mention Green Building Store, their windows, really good. The solar PV seems to be universally popular. I suppose we did benefit from the feed-in tariffs that were still very worthwhile at that time. What worked less well, or risks? I've mentioned the passive stack. It was tricky for the contractor. I think he really didn't know how to work with it. I think.
Yeah, Tom, it might be worth saying that kind of relies on quite, it's a bigger fabric intervention than fitting a fan. So it requires you to find a route from the room that you're trying to get ventilation from up to your roof that's pretty straight and gives you enough lift. And I think that just the logistics of that were quite tricky.
Yeah. And so we've got.
Can I just say we've had quite a positive experience of passive stack. It's worked through most of the house. We've had to sort of put a fan back in the bathroom, but in the kitchen we've and the rest of the house it's really improved the air quality, and the ventilation was something that we were really keen on, and I think one of the things we were most pleased about the design, really, that was taken into account.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just feeding back one or two of the other houses, and we've had where we've had issues with the ventilation, it's probably been because of things like underheating, the house being, so the passive stack relies on a temperature gradient through the house and a stack effect building up. So if the house is not heated for long periods of time, it will cool down, and I think the stack effect probably doesn't work as well. So
it's highly variable, I think, is what you say. It works really well in some instances and then not in others, and it can be quite hard to predict sometimes which you're going to get. So.
Yeah. So in our case, we've got the passive inlet vents and the MEV. It's working fine, no problems at all. We've got good air quality. So I'm just feeding back the general, and we've got Mike saying it's working really well. So it's very dependent on the specifics of the house. The other issue that I've touched on here is air tightness, and Marianne can talk about this a bit more. I think she's got some good information on it. So there was air tightness tests on, I think, on all the houses before
and after.
And whenever there was some interventions done, there was air tightness work done on those specific areas. So if there was internal wall insulation, air tightness work was done on that. But towards the end of the contract, where maybe sort of seeking out other air leakages in the properties that weren't being addressed through the retrofit, then I think there would have been a benefit in investigating where there were air leakages and fixing them. But that kind of, as we got towards the end of the contract, those were the kind of issues that got sort of slipped.
Yeah, I think we really missed out a little bit, and I do it differently now as well, that the monitoring and evaluation that was done as part of this particular program, but across that whole program, was done, it was in a way that it was quite separate. So if I'd been doing it again, I'd have wanted that to be much more integrated with the work that was happening, and, for example, have a kind of pre-completion air tightness test as well, so before all the painting and the plastering and stuff was done, so that you could do a diagnostic on that, rather than just kind of what was done was for the benefit of the university research, rather than necessarily as a tool as part of the project.
Yeah. So I'm nearing the end of my presentation, but so oops, where's it gone? Oh. That's my house. So, and I think it's looking good for 100 years of age. The solar panels are great. The external wall insulation is good. You can see at the bottom here, I've sort of made the photo in the background, but that's one thing that probably my wife would say, is that some of the render on the external wall insulation is starting to pick up some moss from just rain bouncing off the floor, as it will do. So eventually the render will need either cleaning or painting or something. But it's just normal things that you have to do to a house, is just to keep it nice and ship shape. So what next? I think when these retrofits were done, there was, well, everyone kept a gas boiler, is the main headline. So everyone still got gas heating, but I think at some point we'll move to electrification of heat. And I think all of these houses are probably ready for that in one form or another, although a lot of them have got combi boilers, and that's going to be tricky to replace that with heat pumps. Yeah, I don't think the monitoring it should stop. I think that's something that's a big learning thing from Carbon Co-op, and the whole collaboration of households together, collecting data, and the digitization of data, smart meters. That's going to be something that's obviously important moving forward. And then, yeah, people powered retrofit to promote more stuff about Carbon Co-op. I think that's going to be this project, the Go Early project, the Green Deal project has obviously fed a lot of information into the next projects that Carbon Co-op are looking at. Oh yeah, this little graph here, this shows the overnight temperatures for our house. So this was before the retrofit, the dark blue dots and the regression for that. So you can see that our house actually used to go down to about 15 degrees when the outside temperature was averaging 4 degrees outside. After the retrofit, it's more like 16 degrees. Well, it's more like 16 and a half, to be honest, something like that, around there. So the overnight temperature has gone up, let's say the outside by 1.5 degrees. And this is our little mini retrofit, which I'm just collecting data for in orange. It's gone up by maybe another 0.5 degree on average.
Dom, I just wanted to say something about the electrification of heat before we move on as well. So as Dom said, when we were designing this 7 years ago, the carbon intensity of the grid was much, much higher than it is now. So swapping out to any form of electric heating would have been difficult. And the heat pumps at that time as well were quite underdeveloped. I'd had previous experience in a retrofit project with a heat pump that had just gone really quite badly wrong, because the install just wasn't great. I think the consensus on all this is changing because of the decarbonisation of the grid, and also because heat pumps are becoming a bit more normal and people are a bit more familiar with them, and other tech as well, so batteries. And I know, Dom, you've installed a sun amp as well, so Kate actually had a question about that, and whether that now you've swapped out to the sun amp, whether you're able to break out the heat versus hot water gas use and see how much your space heating has dropped, if you've done any analysis on that.
I have. I'd have to swap to a different screen. I could show you quite quickly what's happening with
I'm sure Kate and some other people would love to see that as well, and maybe sorry, before we go on to that, did you have anything else, or were you just gone on to questions anyway?
That's it. The next thing, Q&A.
I wanted to say that we've got Rachel and Mike, so it'd be nice to just hear a little bit of reflection from them on their maybe not as technical, not as graphic heavy reflections. And maybe while they do that, Dom, you could fish out your sun amp data.
Yeah.
So Mike and Rachel, did you want to reflect on the stuff that Dom's been talking about? So
we'd agree without the data, really. I mean, the house is definitely more livable. It's much more comfortable. We don't have black mold in the corner of the house, which is really good. The things, I'm sure.
Well, I suppose it's interesting for you to know what we had done. We didn't get the external wall insulation done. Because of the problems with the contractor, our house sort of fell off the end of where you could get grant payments. So we weren't able to get any grant payments for external wall insulation. So we have got really decent loft insulation, underfloor insulation, which was quite complex, tricky problem to solve because of a lot of dampness under the floor. So we have got perhaps some useful information around that if people are interested. We've got solar panels. We had a battery added later, and anything else?
The triple glazing.
Oh
really
yeah, triple glazing. That's
an
brilliant.
impact.
Yeah.
And that's just improved quality of life as well, because of the sort of, it makes the house a lot quieter as well.
Yeah.
I think the things that surprised us how quickly they made a difference was the loft insulation. Just by going up to the recommended amount, the house was instantly warmer. I mean, that evening you could tell. We've got much better air quality. We don't have the mold.
Somebody wanted some information about what a passive stack is. I don't know that we're the best people to describe that, but it's Marianne perhaps is, but it's a ventilation system, isn't it? That pulls air through the house to vent. So you've got, oh, go on, someone else needs to describe it, not me. But I know that there was a question on the chat to say what is a passive stack, and it's quite important because it's a crucial part of, you can't just create a sealed box without getting some really decent ventilation.
Yeah,
it
has to be part of it. And the two different types of ventilation system that we used as part of the program were the passive stack, which basically has no fans. It's essentially just a duct that goes from a room up to the roof. And it uses the fact that hot air rises to kind of suck air through it, and the wind blows over the top of it that also sucks air through it. But I guess the fact that it doesn't have a fan is a real benefit because it's not using any energy to work, and it's very, very low maintenance. But the flip side of that is that if the wind doesn't blow in the right direction and you don't get enough of a temperature difference, then it doesn't work. And I think in the case of your bathroom, if I remember rightly, your bathroom is being quite intensively used.
There's four people, yeah. There's 4 people in the house, including teenagers. So, you know, the shower time can go on for quite a while, and the passive stack couldn't cope with that. But actually, we found that putting in a mechanical vent can't cope with it either. So I think the passive stack actually coped with it better than the mechanical vent. I think we would perhaps go back to what we had because I think that was doing a better job. Yeah.
Okay, I hadn't realised that.
Yeah.
I haven't spoken to you about that in a while.
I suppose the other thing that we've noticed in the last during the heat over the last few weeks is that I've been working at home, which is not, I suppose there's been people in the house that, and normally we wouldn't be during the working day, is that it's much more comfortable. We didn't really notice how hot it was outside while working. It sort of stayed at a steady temperature, so it stayed comfortably cool as well as comfortably warm.
Not usually a problem in Bolton, but that was helpful. So there's lots of other advantages. We've got really good improvements on our energy bills. So where we were paying about £150 a month, we're now paying £50 through the summer months, and less than, about 80 in the winter months. We're getting feed-in tariff back from the solar panels. What else? They're the biggies, I guess. But just a more pleasant house to live in, really.
Fantastic.
Do you want to know any of the rubbish about it?
Well, let's see what the questions are. Dom, do you want to come back to the sun amp?
Yeah. So, can everyone see this?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is 2 years approximately of our heating from September 2018 through to June now. And so the blue bits are space heating, essentially, of gas. The dark orange here is our hot water using gas. And then we had the sun amp installed just at the end of August last year. So the light orange is where the sun amp has taken over our hot water to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the month. And if I go up, just looking at hot water on its own, this graph is probably easier to look at. So before the sun amp, this was all gas because there was no sun amp.
Mhm.
Here's where the sun amp was installed. August last year, didn't have much of effect because it was right at the end of the month.
Mhm.
And then since then, the sun amp's been providing a lot of our hot water, if not all of it, in March, April, May, June, and now July.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're not using any gas really at the moment to speak of for the last 4.5 months.
Do you want to explain quickly what a sun amp is?
Yes, it's essentially a hot water tank, but doesn't store it as hot water. It stores it as a phase change in a phase change material, and a pipe goes through that material and heats the hot water as it flows through it. So you're able to store electricity, or you could even use solar thermal to change the phase of the material in the sun amp, which they call it a heat battery. So it stores heat, and then when you need hot water, it runs straight through the sun amp, so it becomes instant hot water. And yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
Someone's just on the chat, Adam Harper, has just asked what the size of your PV array is.
Ours is 3.3 kilowatts peak. Yeah, I think they were all between 3 and 4 kilowatts, were they? Is that right, Marianne? Can you remember?
Oh,
Sorry, I was just answering someone else's question, but go on. What was the question?
The question is, what was the size of the solar panel? So ours was 3.3. What did it?
It's probably all around about that, because there's an upper limit on it for what could be fitted without having to get special permission, and obviously a limit on the size of people's roofs. But I think the smallest was about 3 kilowatts, and yeah, just less than 4 was the biggest.
Right. Do you want to help me run through the Q&A, Jonathan?
Yeah. Dom, do you want to just flick your screen back onto the? Well, I could actually. Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, Marianne's been monitoring the Q&A, so I think she should.
Okay, Marianne.
Yeah. So someone had just asked about air tightness targets, so I've answered that one. Basically, our design air tightness target was about 5 meters cubed per meter square per hour. We didn't quite get there on that for some of the reasons that Dom's described. In some houses we almost got there, in others we missed it by quite a bit, but in all cases we at least improved it significantly. There have been retrofit programs that have happened where a retrofit's been done and somehow the air tightness has got worse. So we didn't do that. But air tightness is a biggie, and I think it's really important, and especially at this time it was quite difficult to talk about, because people thought you were making a fuss about nothing, or about, you know, why does it matter, and can I just gunk it up with some mastic, and why are you asking me to use this very expensive tape? But I think it's really, really valuable, and what I would do differently now is probably focus on it a lot more. We did do air tightness training with the contractor, but not all of the staff who had that training then went on and worked on the job, because that's the nature of construction as well. People move around a lot, which is a bit unfortunate. And I think floors are the big area where we missed out on improving air tightness significantly, and that was partly just a logistics thing as well, because in some houses we were trying to avoid levels of disruption, and it's really hard to do air tightness on floors and not cause fair degree of disruption. So, but it's kind of what's doable within the logistics.
I'd say there's, in terms of it, I can't really talk about the target. I know what we ended up with, which was about 9.
Yeah.
We've done a little bit more. I've done a little bit more of air tightness work on our house, but I don't know how effective it is because I haven't had another blower test done since then. Although I'm thinking of having one done to find out. Using my home energy planner, which is another Carbon Co-op service or feature, it looks like probably well over 30% of the residual heat loss in our house is now from air leakage and ventilation. So that's an area that I might want to explore a bit further, and yeah, it's something we need to understand better, I think.
Yeah. But having said that as well, Dom, your house is 9. The requirement for building regs for new houses, the kind of backstop requirement is 10. So you're better than the. I mean, not many people build to that. Most aim actually to get better than that, but you're still at least as good as many quite recent houses in a 100-year-old terrace. So
yeah, for sure. I don't want to focus on I'm not focusing on the negatives. I'm just saying how we can.
Yeah, but I agree. I think it's just because not a lot of people are. Well, not everyone will be familiar with all these numbers, so it's just kind of calibrating the numbers.
Yeah. So we got a question from David Lamb, which I think you'd like to answer, Dom. How did you install the floor insulation? Was it mineral wool between the joists, using the membrane for air tightness under the joist, wrapping over the joists?
No, it's wood fibre insulation that's been just pushed between the joists underneath and secured with webbing as a strap under it, stapled to each joist from under. So all the work was done from underneath, in order to minimise the disruption to us as a household. I suppose that's something we could have said at the introduction, is that nobody moved out of their houses. Some of them may have moved out for a day or two, but we didn't move out at all. Trying to have the work done around you. If I was talking like the month after the work had been done, then I might have talked a lot more about that. But now it's 5 years later, we can all forget it, and it's just a passage in our lives.
And the underfloor, you actually got under the floor yourself?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, but we had a couple of guys doing most of the work, and I went under and helped and checked and stuff like that.
Yeah. And Mike, Mike and Rachel?
Our approach was quite different, because I think the initial plan was to have the same sort of insulation as Dom, but we when we went under the floorboards, it was far too damp. There was issues with the subfloor, and it was just so we ended up having a trench around this room for about 6 months while everybody worked out what the best approach was. And in the end, it was a glass pumice which sort of filled the void, and that sort of it keeps the rooms warmer, but it also I think it's a desiccant. It sort of keeps it dry as well, so water can't track up through it. It can only track downwards. So it's worked. I think Rachel just went and
I just had a look, and it's dry under there, and we had a lot of rain yesterday, so it's doing its job.
Interesting, brilliant.
And we had like rotten joists, didn't we, before? And yes,
they've been fine since.
Touch wood, they're okay. Yeah.
while we're still on floors, your underfloor space, Dom, is quite small, isn't it? Whereas Mike and Rachel, yours was a bit
huge, yeah.
Yeah, because you're on a slope, aren't you? That was
on a slope, so it's shallower in the back room and quite deep in the front room. So we had a different approach to how they filled the void in the front and the back, but it was the same material. Yeah.
Some more of the questions. David Lamb had a question. What is the phase change material in your sun amp?
I believe it's some kind of salts. So if you know those pocket warmers where you click they're sort of like a gel inside a plastic pouch, and you click a little thing, they turn sort of, it's a waxy sort of material, and they turn into a solid, and it gets quite hot, and you can warm your pocket with those. Essentially, the sun amp contains a large quantity of that, or something like that. So in changing from a solid, from a liquid to a solid, it gets hot.
Yeah. And John Gething asks, why don't you have heat recovery? What difference would this make?
MVHR, presumably. Mechanical.
Yeah.
Well, maybe Marriott. I mean, again, it's something that if we were looking at air tightness and what to do next, then it's one thing that we might think about, but we've got the passive stack, we've got the passive inlet vents, I suppose. Yeah, but as a design strategy, I think it's worked. It's achieved the targets, but Marianne can explain why it wasn't chosen for the as a general practice.
So for people who may not be familiar with that, it's basically a form of ventilation where you warm up the air, the fresh air that you're bringing in, by passing it over a heat exchanger with the air that you're extracting and putting out, so that it raises the temperature of the air coming in by a few degrees, just to help reduce heat loss, and often helps with comfort. I would say that the biggest reason we didn't do it was because MVHR in retrofit is a nightmare to find the space for. Most of the houses we're talking about here they're not massive houses, they're kind of normal size houses, and we were consciously trying not to do too much disruptive work inside a lot of them. I think in the case of Dom's house, the works inside the house that caused Dom and family to need to redecorate were pretty minimal. Whereas if we'd started trying to route MVHR ducts everywhere, that would have become more difficult, because what you have to do is basically run a duct to and from every single room. So you run supply ducts to your living rooms and your bedrooms, and extract ducts from bathrooms and kitchens, and just finding space for that in an existing house is quite difficult. And I think the other reason was that we knew that we weren't going to get the levels of air tightness that might make that worthwhile in terms of energy recovery, and that they're also quite expensive. So to do MVHR well, and from past experience, it's only worth doing well. Don't fit a cheap MVHR, or you might as well not have like a cheap and badly installed MVHR, or else you might as well almost not have a ventilation system for what it can get you. You're talking about spending kind of £4,000 and upwards in a lot of cases. So by the time you pay for the install and stuff, so that would be quite a large chunk of a lot of people's budgets. And because we were using a system that had a humidity controller on the intake for whether it was passive stack or MVHR, that kind of moderated the intake air a little bit in the case of these houses. So the amount of heat you lose from ventilation should be a little bit less than if you just did the traditional thing of a hole, a very bog standard hole in the wall and a fan or stack. So yeah, that's why.
We're getting lots of questions about this sun amp. You need a separate control device between the PV panels and the sun amp to divert the excess PV into the sun amp.
Yes, the answer is yes. I've got an eddy controller that diverts the excess PV into the sun lamp.
Fantastic. A couple more. There's a few process ones. Ian, but also Ian Maidley. I think, was your graph with 2 room temperature measurements in it, Dom? Were you measuring your internal temperatures?
Before and afterwards?
Or maybe it was before and after, because he was saying, was there any change to the external temperature or wind chill between the 2 room temperature measurements? So I guess yes.
Right. They were both recorded over 11 days. One was February 2014 to 2013, 11 days in February 2013, and the other one was 11 days in February 2000. I'd have to bring it up again to be sure which year it was. But so the temperature might have been slightly different outside, but I don't think the differences between the internal temperatures before and after are so large that they're, I also showed it on the, I could bring back that regression graph as well. Essentially, the answer is that the retrofit has improved the setback temperatures or the overnight temperatures a lot, by 1.5 degrees typically, maybe as much as 2 degrees now. The triple glazed bifold door fitted at the back of the house. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah. David Lamb says, what kind of external wall insulation was it? And was it with, see if I can say this, cementitious render?
Cementitious.
Very good.
No, it was wood fibre with a modified polymer render on it. So it's all a fully breathable system. Shouldn't say breathable, should say vapor open.
Okay. There's a couple of questions here on process. One from Matthew asks whether retrofit assessors, retrofit coordinators will result in better quality and the trust mark increase consumer confidence. That's linked to PAS 2035, so we're getting very technical here, but these are like new standards introduced by the British Standards Authority and endorsed by the government. And this is the people-powered retrofit service that Carbon Corp and Urbed are running. It harmonises within that system, and we employ now a retrofit coordinator and assessors, both in the staff team and on a freelance basis as well. So, I mean, that is our view, that it will that it not only increases quality, but it creates a standardized.
Because Jonathan's frozen a bit.
I'm sorry. Do you want to answer that, Marianne?
Well, yeah, I think it's good. All of those systems are good in that they are helping to bring up the bottom of things. So it's kind of, if some of you have seen there have been some terrible examples of retrofit work done badly, and those systems, I think, are designed to hopefully avoid things like that happening in the future. I don't think that they, on their own, will result in every retrofit project being brilliant. I think there's lots of other stuff that goes around that, to do with skills in the supply chain, to do with briefing, that they all help with, but so they're kind of necessary, but not the only part of the puzzle. Really.
And also Pia asked whether there's an advantage to several householders doing a retrofit together rather than in one go, especially in urban settings. And I'd say there are advantages and disadvantages, and especially in whole house retrofit, which is so particular, so specific to houses. And there can be houses all very similar in the same street, but they can be different amendments and modifications and different priorities of householders. What would you say, Marianne?
Yeah, well, like the experience of doing this project, one contract and a number of houses, was not necessarily one that I'd want to repeat anytime soon, because I think that it in itself brought a lot of challenges. And I think what we need to do actually is demonstrate in the owner-occupied sector anyway. I think it's slightly different when it comes to social housing. Demonstrate that there's enough demand, and then a lot of your SME builder contractors will scale up to meet that demand. And it isn't necessarily about everyone sitting under one contract. It's about there being enough work on an ongoing basis for those firms to be able to make a decent living and know that when they finish this job, there's another job to do.
Yeah. Okay. There was a question there, but it's gone. Which was around whether the wood fibre had slumped, whether it had changed its shape.
It's not that kind of wood fibre. It's rigid boards, so they're kind of pressed into rigid boards, so it won't slump.
Fantastic. There's a few very technical questions on here. So I think we should probably round up. Paul's written quite a long one about air bricks and his own house.
Yes, see that. We always get like floor insulation. There's always questions about floor insulation.
We're trying to get Sophie Pelsmaker, who's an expert on underfloor insulation and did a PhD on it, but she's super busy at the moment. She also says a PhD on the subject has just taught her what she doesn't know, which is an interesting take on it.
It's the trouble with learning stuff.
Okay. So I think we'll round up if that's okay. If you got any other closing remarks, Dom, Marianne.
No, I think there was something from Ian on my comments on MVHR, because I have been to Ian's house and I have seen his MVHR system, which he fitted himself, which I think it's slightly different than getting a contractor to do it, because when you're doing it yourself, you have a little bit more control over quality, so that can make a difference. But I suppose my comments were more generally that that rule of life, that you pay for what you get what you pay for to some degree. So if Ian's been able to do it fairly cheaply, but that's obviously probably didn't pay himself to do that, so once you add in labour costs and stuff. But yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Dom, Marianne, Mike, Rachel. Not there. She got her head under the floorboards again.
She's gone.
As I've said, yes, we'll be circulating everything from tonight. I would like a couple of notices before we go. Yeah. Okay. I've put a link in the chat. So have a look at the link. In the meantime, I'll explain what it is. Oh, I need to share my screen. So here we go. One last shout for the AGM that's coming up in a couple of weeks. There's a booking form that I've put in the chat. Also, we would love to hear your thoughts and feedback on tonight's session. And so we've got an exciting new innovation, which is a Jamboard, as you can see here. And what you do basically, if you should be able to see my screen, but you click on the sticky note here and you create a sticky note, type some words and press save, and it appears on the board, yeah? And if you can't cancel that, and you can move it around. But essentially, what we're looking for is in the middle on the H, 1 to 10, leave a sticky note on how good today's session was. Was it awful, 1, or was it good, 10? On the left-hand side, use the sticky notes, and use the sticky note to indicate 1 to 10 as well. Use the sticky note to tell us what was good about today. And on the right-hand side, use the sticky note, click here, tell us what was bad about today, and make it green. And underneath, recommendations. What should we be doing? So you can access the Jamboard by clicking on the link in the chat. Fire away, click on these sticky notes, write us, tell us what you think about today, give us some feedback, let us improve in the future. Okay, so that's it. I'll leave the Jamboard here running for the next few minutes, next 5 or 10 minutes for people to add to. But yeah, that's everything from us. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Dom. Thanks, Marianne.
And thank you, Dom, especially.
Yes, thank
For
you.
all the graphs, as ever.
Thanks, Mike.
Cheers.
See you. Take care.